And civil liberties, we do a lot on that.
The show is about technological utopia and creepy dystopia.
Law and lawbreakers.
Blowhards and liars.
Mainly, though, On the Media is about an hour. Please spend it with us.
Saturday mornings at 7 on KSJE, Farmington.
Thane Maynard here. The 90-Second Naturalist is a compact little radio show with expansive goals to raise awareness and improve understanding of the natural world. To do this, we take just 90 seconds and present stories about the plants and animals around us. The facts are fun, the sound effects are neat, and the host ain't so bad either. Please join me for The Naturalist.
Listen every weekday afternoon during the KSJE Evening News at 5:30.
Hi, I'm Don Glass.
And I'm Yael Cassander.
And we host A Moment of Science.
The world is always posing questions, and science is always in pursuit of answers.
A Moment of Science offers many of those answers in a timely moment of entertainment and enlightenment.
We hope you'll tune in.
For more information about A Moment of Science or to download our latest podcasts, visit us at amomentofscience.org.
Listen weekday afternoons at 5:45 on KSJE. This program is supported by San Juan Health Partners Urology, providing a wide range of personalized services for the whole family, including children. Our caring professionals are dedicated to helping meet your urology health needs with skill, experience, and service you need. For a complete listing of our services and to learn more, visit sanjuanhealthpartners.com or call 505-609-6300. San Juan Health Partners Urology, a division of San Juan Regional Medical Center. 8:36 Thursday morning here on KSJE. You're listening to the Scott Michlin Morning Program, and good morning to our viewers who are joining us live via the KSJE Facebook page and YouTube channel. Taking a look around the country this morning, it's a bit snowy in Vermont today, where the temperature is 10 degrees. The sun is out. This is the Mad River Valley that you're seeing on our visual radio stream this morning on Facebook and YouTube. The Mad River Valley in snowy Vermont today. Here at home, it is 47 degrees outside our studios here at San Juan College, and we are expecting a mostly cloudy day today with a chance of showers in the forecast. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about the forecast here in just a moment here on KSJE, because we're expecting, as I mentioned, a little bit of rain and clouds today. Chance of showers, 58 for a high, 40 overnight tonight. Then maybe some thunderstorms on Friday with a high of 56 tomorrow. Some snow showers in the forecast for Friday night with a low of 33. Then things clear up for the weekend. Partly sunny on Saturday with a high of 46, and then mostly sunny skies on Sunday with a high of 55, but more chances for rain developing into Sunday night and on into early next week. I'm Scott Michlin, and my guest on the radio this morning and on our visual radio program through the magic of Skype, Paul Reed is joining us from his home and outside of the Taos area this morning. And Paul, again, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Scott. So glad to be back on with you.
Good to have you with us. We've been talking about this ancient art of tattooing. You have brought a couple of articles to my attention, which is fascinating to me, that the oldest evidence of a tattoo kit, a tool that would create tattoos, has been found in southern Utah. And the second oldest, I guess now, that we're talking about was found right here at Aztec ruins.
Right. I suspect as people look at other collections that more of these will come up.
Right.
And, a lot of times you collect things in the field and there's not always time to do a full analysis right away. And so when folks go back and practice again, what we like to call preservation archaeology, really trying to make the collections that we already have pay off for a variety of research and different concerns, then you find interesting things. So yeah, that makes this just all the more interesting to me.
Right. Very much so. And so for those of us who aren't in the field, Paul Reed, how would you go about dating something like this? That's a piece of wood or some cactus spines and things like that. Is it more about the things that was discovered around it, or is there a way to actually date the artifact?
Right. Well, there's, dating, of course, can go both ways. We do what's called relative dating, and that is based on the context, the site that it was in, the items around it. If There was, for example, some ceramics that we know are dated to a particular time range. So that's relative and context driven. The other side, of course, is directly dating the object. Since the handle is wood, it's one of those cases where if decisions were made by the people who control the collections, with proper consultation with Native American tribes, the handle could be sent off to a radiocarbon lab to get an actual date. But so that's kind of a debate, and I don't think there's yet been any word that that's what they were going to do. It was found in a site that is part of what we describe as the Basket Maker II period, which is really region-wide in the 4 states, in the 4 corners, and dates between about 500 BC and CE 500, so about 1,000-year long, pretty long period of time. So the 2,000 years that is being thrown out as a relative date is kind of in the middle of that time range, right as we passed into the Common Era, around year 0 or 1. So yeah, and that's something that actually has happened more and more as well as people have gone back in and looked at older collections, particularly of items that we describe as perishable, that are made out of plant materials, wood, yucca, other materials, that, by finding the funding and having a real well-executed research plan, as well as consultation with affected tribes and descendant communities, then people have gone back and submitted items for what we describe as radiocarbon dating, AMS dates, which can use an extremely small piece of material. So we're talking, an ounce or 2, literally, as little as 10 grams to do that. So in this case, that would be very interesting. You of course, again, have to weigh the destruction of the object through the dating versus what you're going to gain through science, and those are interesting ethical questions that we have to pursue. It's
right.
Like I'm getting a little sunlight coming in on me here.
You are. Well, that's all right though. So you're going to change the camera angle just a little bit for us on our for our viewers who are watching. But when we talk about that, Paul Reed, that is true, and that part of the object is kind of destroyed in one of these dating processes, even a small amount. I imagine that is a bit of a tough decision to make for some folks who find these very rare articles to give up even in a smidge of a little bit of artifact, right?
Right, and I know we've talked on a couple of prior shows about the ethics of balancing practicing science with the concerns of descendant tribal communities and just the need to preserve objects for future study. So, all those things have to be weighed. We've gotten better through time, I think, as archaeologists, and as we connect to sort of the more scientific realm where we do different types of studies and sourcing, dating, all these things, where those labs have, through time, required less and less of the actual objects to, be ground up into a paste and put in the solution or whatever the particular process is for that. So that's been an advancement, and we've been able to preserve more of those objects. But there are still studies that are inherently destructive, and so sometimes, we have to go through that process in order to learn what we'd like to learn about an individual object and how that connects ultimately to other things, because what really makes archaeology what it is as a science and as a pursuit is we're not merely focused on the objects and putting them in museums and saying this is an object of art and beauty. That's a point where we begin, and certainly many of these objects have that inherent value. But what we want to do as archaeologists is we want to study those objects, and we want to put them into the context of the group that produced them and help have those objects help inform us about how people lived, what was important to them, what identities did they care about, and just a whole list of questions in the social realm primarily. And that, of course, is the exciting thing for me about having been an archaeologist for 30 years and having seen this transition continue, where from archaeologists in the past being catalogers of just the objects to, archaeologists being scientists and as well as humanists trying to understand the human condition. And, again, not just putting the objects, in a case and saying, wow, that's cool, that's an object.
Right.
So, again, it's a balancing of these different values. And I think many times the public still sort of maps on to archaeology as the collection and, storage of objects. And, again, that's a beginning point. But to circle back to the earlier point, what makes our museum collection so valuable today is we are trying, as we do work today, in the modern era, to not excavate as many sites because we already have these large collections. And many of our Native American colleagues and the folks we consult with regularly and talk to would prefer that sites be left alone as much as possible. So as we make better use of museum collections, we're able to do less invasive studies, surface studies, mapping studies. We've talked on prior shows about LIDAR, ground penetrating radar to understand what's under the ground. So the science is really helping us advance our understanding of the way different human communities have lived through time, and to do that through less direct impacts to places that indigenous communities, tribal communities would prefer be left alone. And that is, again, why the museum collections really pay off for us in ways just like this.
Sure. And so as we talk about this artifact that was found in this article that was found in southern Utah, and the other artifact that was found here at Aztec ruins, Paul Reed, I guess, can we then conclude that this was a pretty common practice in the region, and that this tattooing of ancient Puebloans was taking place, was a pretty normal cultural thing that was happening throughout what is now the Four Corner States?
Yeah, I think we can definitely approach an understanding that says this was not a super rare activity. As we look at all the other objects and bits of daily life, yearly life that have come out of collections, these are still very rare items. So and it's tough to infer from just a couple of objects how many people in a particular group might have been part of a practice, that had tattooing be perhaps part of an initiation. That's certainly something that could come to mind as a rite of passage, and other things, as marking membership in this group versus that group. So, the frequency would suggest that it wasn't probably something that was done every day with every person in the group. So I think we're still looking at a fairly rare, and, the word esoteric gets thrown around a lot and certainly has different definitions, but it's probably a fairly good word to use here, just in the sense that esoteric would mean rare, unusual, and tied to a specific set of circumstances, which we don't have a great deal of understanding about yet. So so any of you students out there who are listening, here is a master's thesis at the least, and perhaps a PhD dissertation. Dig into the art of tattooing, develop context worldwide, which we again have from many places around the world, and then really kind of zero in on the Four Corners and the ancestral Pueblo and culture and groups, and see what we know, and then connect that to modern Pueblo ethnography. See, there's a research program all laid out.
Wow, you just did it right here for us. How about that? That's amazing.
All we need is a little bit of hard work.
That's right? Just a little bit, right? And some elbow grease, but that's part of what your work is, I know. And you talk to us about it every month, which we appreciate. And so, where do we go from here, Paul Reed, with this new information? Obviously, we have some of the oldest artifacts in Western America here in the Four Corners region, at least when it refers to these tattoo kits, and that's what you call them, right? Our tattoo kits, right? When they're discovered.
Right. That seems to be a good word. The grad student in question from Washington State University up in Pullman, had released this to the press, and he's conducting more research and also looking at the items that were found in the context, in the same context, the same level as that tattoo kit from Southeast Utah. So I think we're going to learn more as his work proceeds, and he does some of the things that I just talked about, try to connect that into the realm of, what do we see elsewhere in the region. So I think we'll learn more as the months and hopefully not too many years unfold and his research finishes. And then, again, I think folks will probably be on the lookout for these types of objects and kits in existing collections as we go back.
Right.
One individual that I've worked closely with over the years has recently launched a project to go back to, again, what we describe as the perishable artifact collections, the wood, the hide, plant materials that are in museums that were collected many years ago. Her name is Lori Webster, and she's based out of Mancos, Colorado. And Lori put together a team with some tribal participants who are experts in their specific craft fields. And she's been going through and assessing these collections in a dozen or so museums in the West and some in the East. And Lori's project's been particularly interesting. We could certainly talk about it in the future, but I don't think to date she's discovered any tattooing kits. But again, her work is really important because she's making these collections that we have that haven't been studied really pay off for modern research, connecting it into questions that we have now that people weren't necessarily looking into 50 or 75 years ago. And the fact that she has 2 tribal participants on her team from the get-go really means that we've just broadened our understanding and the base of understanding from the beginning, and we're not just looking at it through a fairly narrow lens. So anyway, I wanted to give a shout out to Lori Webster because her type of collaborative project, making use of the collections, is really a very important direction that a lot of folks are heading.
Right. And again, with your work from Selman Ruins and your familiarity with, of course, Chaco Canyon and Aztec and things like that, as we mentioned, one of these kits was found in Aztec. It's not unreasonable to think that folks from the other locations were adorning themselves as well, whether they did them there or traveled to Aztec or the tattoo artist traveled elsewhere. I mean, that stuff we still don't quite know, right?
Right. But that's an interesting point that is a good one to speak about. This tattooing kit was probably personal property, even in a situation where Pueblo people generally share certain things in common,
right,
but then have Pueblo personal property, like different groups worldwide. So this tattooing kit was probably the property of the individual who trained himself, or perhaps was trained. And certainly this could be in a ritualistic sense, as we mentioned earlier, with a religious specialist training an individual in an apprenticeship type situation. And yeah, this individual may well have traveled around doing specific types of body decoration tattooing for individuals who wanted it, perhaps, again, in a spiritual context, maybe in other contexts. And that might help explain in part why we don't see these items frequently in the archaeological record.
Right.
If contrast, with daily use pottery, which essentially are the dishes that we use today still, just somewhat differently used. There's lots and lots of those in the record. Lots and lots of discarded bits of bone that might have been worked into tools, different stone, lithic tools, and the remains there. A specialized tattooing kit would have been something that would have taken some effort to make, and certainly would have been a skilled,
sure,
what's the word I'm looking for? A specialized tool,
right,
essentially.
And that's
probably at the top of the specialized toolkit, pyramid, if we're going to look at it that way, and pretty valuable to that individual, and probably the source of livelihood for that individual, whether in a spiritual religious context or something that we might think of as more secular.
Sure.
Traveling around doing that. So, yeah,
right.
I think, again, there's some very interesting avenues here to explore, because to this day, tattoo artists are a very unique, specialized class in our society. And they're not, they've certainly increased in volume over the last 10 years.
Right.
But it's not something you find on every corner as you would a grocery store or a clothing store or different things.
That's very true. And Paul, in the minutes we have remaining this morning, do we know anything about the pigment that was used for these tattoos, as we've shown? I mean, it looks like a darker ink or something on the end of those cactus spines, and certainly you'd want something that would be useful, I guess, in marking up the skin and permanent, or at least wanting it to be permanent, but not injurious to the skin or the person. So what do we know anything? Was this more berries or ink, or the same type of thing that they use for dyeing fabric, or what? Do we know anything?
Yeah, I think the individual, the grad student, is pursuing some additional chemical analysis to be sure, but his inference is that the black is a mineral-derived pigment. So
I see.
Basically a mineral called hematite, which actually appears in a red form in little nodules, you grind it up, mix it with water, and it can go on to pottery looking red, but will actually be black when it's finished. The other materials, there are just more straight iron-derived materials that are black. There's the mineral or the element manganese, which can be extracted and then ground up. And then, of course, there's sort of the whole organic side. In the past, most of the organically derived paints for a strong black color were basically beeweed plants. So they would collect the plants, the leaves, and boil them down into a real thick sort of paste, add water, and until the consistency was right. That was used to paint on pottery and different fabrics and materials, and potentially would work as well. I think the mineral paints might be a better avenue for the tattooing, but again, that's kind of part of the research, sorting that out. And then the other question is, were there different color elements introduced? These two, in this particular kit, the small prickly pear needles were stained real dark black, so it seems that this was perhaps just a monocolor, just a nice black tattooing that was going through, but there's no reason you couldn't do it with other pigments that would produce reds or yellows, and certainly with the turquoise minerals you could perhaps get a nice blue turquoise color.
Interesting.
Depending on how that worked. What we see on pottery, of course, has to go through a firing process, so the color that you paint onto a pot is not necessarily your final color.
Right.
But what we do see in the fairly limited fragments of textiles and yucca and other plant materials and hides is that there's 4 or 5 different colors typically represented.
Interesting. Okay. Well, Paul, I think we have covered this topic, but we're out of time. We could talk a lot more about it, I know. But it's certainly fascinating in the fact, again, that it's so close to home. We sometimes forget, those of us who live here, how really in the center of the archaeological universe we really are, with a lot of these discoveries and a lot of these things that are still being learned about our area right here. So thank you again for discussing it with me. Absolutely. My pleasure. And we should do it again. All right. I think we will. We'll check with you again next month. Great. All right. Thank you, Scott. All right, Paul. Thanks so much. That is Paul Reed, local archaeologist. He works with Archaeology Southwest and Salmon Ruins, of course. He joins me every month, regulars, for a visit here to talk about current archaeology issues with me on KSJE. Back with more in just a moment, everybody. It is 8:56.